Happy Wednesday. Today is Wednesday, July 13th, 2022. Today's daily Bible readings come to us from Psalm 7, Amos 5, 1 through 9, Matthew 25, 31 through 46, Psalm, you could have also read, I should say, Psalm 25, 11 through 20, Ecclesiastes 9, 13 through 18, and then end up with Matthew again. And I am going to take a look at Matthew 25, 31 through 46. And talk about how you got your sheep and you got your goats. It's a divided flock in this story. Jesus is taking the people, and this is Jesus talking about when the Son of Man comes in all his glory. And spoiler alert, he's the Son of Man who's going to come in his glory. So this is a nondescript, non-specific end of days kind of scenario, and he talks about taking the people who say they follow, right, and dividing them into the sheep and the goats, dividing the flock. And this wasn't an unusual thing in the ancient world and in the biblical world. You'd run your sheep and your goats together because they all pretty much ate the same thing. And the goats were kind of good, I guess, because they're kind of ornery and maybe took care of the sheep, or supposedly. But I often wonder myself about this because it isn't even like that biblically speaking that goats are worse than sheep. It wasn't like in the biblical view that goats were unclean animals and sheep were clean animals. Like we see that all the time. They would have both. They were as useful as sheep. They provided meat just like sheep did. They provided milk just like sheep did. Yes, you can get milk from a sheep. You could even use their hair. Now, granted, it wasn't as great as wool for making garments and things like that, but you could still use it for making rough things like tent coverings and things like that. And they were even used for sacrifice in the biblical world. You see that in the Old Testament. They were used for sacrifice just like sheep. But here's the thing, I think maybe they weren't the atoning sacrifice. They would use them as sacrifices for sin, but it wasn't the atoning sacrifice. That was reserved for the lamb. The lamb was the sacrificial animal of the Passover. It That was the reserve of the sheep, of the lamb specifically. It became the symbol of righteousness, i.e., if you've heard the term, the Lamb of God, who is the Christ, right? Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God. And so I think what's going on here is like he's separating the kinds, and he's taking his own kind into him. And by that I mean, we understand Jesus is the Lamb of God, so arguably the goat, greatest of all time, not goat as in, but he is the one. And so he separates the people into two groups: those who are like him, those who have faithfully followed in his ways, and another group of those who aren't like him. He judges them by how they have lived out their faith. Did they love their neighbor like their neighbor was Jesus himself? Did they love their neighbor the way Jesus loved them? Or did they ignore their neighbor like their neighbor didn't matter, and consequently like Jesus didn't matter? I'm sure that the goats, if they had known that it was really Jesus they were dealing with, they would have done all those things that was expected of them. I think all of us are like that. But that's the thing, though, about this. The sheep were ignorant too. Mm, They didn't know about the other people. They they were ignorant of who they were dealing with. Right? They knew Christ though, and they knew how Christ had loved them, and they acted accordingly towards others. They loved their neighbor the way Christ loved them. Anyway, that's the DBR for today. Get out, enjoy the day, and we'll talk to you later. Boop.